Welcome to Automating Reporting on Compliance Controls at Cloud Scale. Thanks for being with us here so early in the week at reInvent. Super curious always, how many people in the room are Datadog customers today? All right, love to see that. The majority of folks, if you're new to Datadog, that's okay too. We've got a pretty great story to share with you here coming up. In today's agenda, we're going to talk about why compliance frameworks are challenging in general, but specifically in cloud computing. And in just a minute, I'll bring my co-speaker out here on stage to talk to you just a little bit about Tally's journey with Datadog. And we'll wrap things up, as always, with a great demo of how you can go beyond compliance reporting and automate away remediating some compliance violations using brand new features inside of the Datadog platform. And if you are interested in more compliance sessions, here are the other compliance sessions at reInvent. There's not a ton of them, but if you would identify as a compliance person, these might also be interesting. Do we have anybody that does compliance in the room? Just a few, just a few. And also, if you have things to tweet or photos from the session or things that you liked, of course, we love that. When you share that, you're in hashtag SEC232-S. Twitter and LinkedIn are most welcome. So I actually think when I looked at the session catalog that this is the only PCI session at reInvent. And maybe that's when because when we all think about compliance, we think about pages and pages of checklists or tools that don't really work with our cloud architectures. That might sound a little boring. When you're searching for sessions in the catalog, you may even have thought that the title of this talk sounded a lot like a mandatory HR training. The good news is that we're going to try and keep this really tactical, super engaging through the session. Hopefully by the end, you'll come away understanding how observability can make compliance engaging and effective for your engineering teams. So if you don't know me, I'm Andrew Krug. I lead the security advocacy team at Datadog. You may have seen me on one of our security observability days or the Datadog Security Labs blog. My co-speaker today is Andrew Capobianco. It's easy, we're both Andrew, in case you forget. And he's one of a very small group of security engineers at Tally. He'll be on stage out here in just a bit. If you're not familiar with the compliance problem in engineering, you probably ought to be. These are just a few of the frameworks that apply pretty broadly across the industry in the United States. And of course, there's more than just these. These are just the big ones. In fact, there are entire business verticals that have spun up just to provide attestations of compliance from one company to another in processes like procurement. Of course, today we're going to focus on PCI DSS, which is the payment card framework that you might be subject to if you process credit cards in the AWS cloud. And depending on how many transactions you do, you're subject to more and more stringent requirements. So PCI's initial draft, if you don't know the history, started in 2004 as the result of about $750 million in online fraud. Now, that might sound like a pretty small number to us today. The credit card companies got together and basically said that it's an unacceptably high risk not to have this regulated, and something had to be done. The problem here is that the AWS cloud didn't even really come into existence for the general public until about 2006. So this leaves a lot of gaps in the interpretation of these frameworks when it comes to applying them to cloud. And for those that are unfamiliar with compliance, compliance really has three main parts: the control, the implementation, and the measurement of how effective that organization is at the implementation of that control. Responsible individuals are charged with attesting compliance to auditors in order to maintain their status at regular intervals. And since we can't really modify governing body controls, we have to focus on implementation and measurement, which is where most of the presentation will be centered around today. Just how do you interpret, act on the controls in those frameworks within your AWS environment? Compliance is present in a lot of modern systems, though, not just digital systems. In fact, when I think about my personal first interactions with compliance, and I always like to tell a little story in these, it goes back to actually when I used to round up cows in the mountains of a place called Butte Falls, Oregon. Bring hundreds of cows in every year to inspect and assure that everyone was healthy, and then send them back out. So you have potentially hundreds of cattle, a variety of problems, and you have to scan them all to see if there's an issue. Does this sound familiar to anybody? So we'd go out about 6 people at a time and try to bring in all these cows. But some of them really didn't want to come back into the barn, and we'd miss a few. Which isn't great, because they can pass along problems to the rest of the herd. Again, sound familiar to anybody? We were dealing with single horses and single riders kind of strategy, which meant that we had to increase the number of staff in order to scale the operation. Until one day, we decided that maybe technology could be an accelerator for our problem. And that looked a lot like a tractor full of hay, which is not dissimilar to the challenges that we face in cloud, trying to gain visibility, scan workloads, and provide the correct solution the first time. Which brings us to Datadog Cloud Security Management, or Datadog CSM, as we often call it. As you know, Datadog is intensely customer-focused. In fact, it's one of the primary reasons why we built and continue to build our portfolio of security products. And the things that we heard from our customers was that they had large businesses with increasingly large footprints in cloud, and security could not slow down the business. They were suffering from tool sprawl and siloed data that made it increasingly hard to act when there was a security issue, which resulted in increased risk, security teams becoming gatekeepers, not coaches, and increasingly long times to detect and remediate findings. Datadog's Cloud Security Management product seeks to close those gaps as the one place that engineers can go to see their security posture and get prescriptive guidance on how to resolve compliance issues much more rapidly. And with that, I'd like to introduce Andrew Capobianco, Staff Security Engineer at Tally, to share just a tiny bit about Tally's story.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm also Andrew. I'm Andrew Capobianco. I'm a Staff Security Engineer at Tally. Go in here. So before I get into the part of our presentation that I get deep into PCI compliance, I want to introduce you to Tally because you might not have heard of us. So we're going to talk about Tally's business, our tech, and a little bit about how we operate our infrastructure. About 8 years ago, Tally started our journey to build the first and only credit card robot. It's a robot designed to help people be less stressed and better off financially. Since then, we've helped our customers save millions of dollars, and we paid off over $2 billion in credit card debt. We spent 6 years building the underlying technology and securing nationwide regulator approval. We built a strong and robust consumer business addressing a massive consumer pain point, the anxiety that's associated with credit card debt. We ease this anxiety by helping them pay and manage their cards in the smartest way possible. Customers save thousands of dollars on interest, achieve their goals faster, and get guaranteed late fee protection across their cards. Now, we're focused on expanding our reach by offering an SDK to enterprise-scale financial institutions to white label, and they can embed our robot into their banking apps and experiences. This is a really exciting moment in our growth as we look to provide the benefits of the Tally robot to new companies and to millions of consumers nationwide. Now, Tally is still startup size. Like many in the tech sector this year, our team sizes have shrunk, while the scope of our business and technology footprint has grown. We move quickly, we deploy on average 10 times a day, and our mean lead time to change is around 7 hours. Now, it's important at our scale to find ways to do more with less, to utilize automation, third-party tooling, and third-party expertise. The foundation of our infrastructure and technology is powered by AWS, and where we can, we try to stay within the AWS ecosystem. Now, a quick disclaimer as I step through this, Tally is a customer of Datadog, but in order to protect our privacy, we've used the screenshots from the Datadog organization, their demo organization. So what have we built on top of AWS? It's really quite a lot. There's quite a diversity in the types of workloads and integration points we have. This includes our SDK and RESTful APIs that support our business-to-business interactions. We're also mobile, so we have iOS, Android, web experiences on the consumer side. We're helping our customers manage hundreds of millions of dollars in credit card debt. We're constantly having to scale up and down to accommodate those data workloads and batch processing because we have to make sure everyone's cards are paid on time, accurately, and exactly as expected. Now, from my corner in security, This is a lot to watch over. Each piece brings its own set of challenges to keep our things tight and secure. Now, an important part of Tally's strategy is how we set up our environments. You can think of our environments like compliance zones. We have to have infrastructure that's fast, reliable, and secure so we can sustainably ship our software. So in our lean security team, we have a running bucket of work called Make Audits Suck Less. For PCI more specifically, let's make audits suck less because it's easy for people to do the right thing. And one of the ways that we do this is in how we segment our environments. Like I said, we call these our compliance zones. And this is really crucial for us to reduce the footprint of where we have to apply what level of security controls, and also when it comes to time to audit, we want to limit the scope of what they need to look at. So in the core of Tally's infrastructure, we harness Kubernetes, and the foundation of Kubernetes that we use is actually BottleRocket OS. If you haven't checked out BottleRocket OS, really recommend it. It's a mutable design and is a great strategy for PCI compliance. It streamlines security, and it ensures the consistency across our deployments. Now, efficient scaling is also at the forefront of our organization, so we achieve this through Carpenter, which dynamically adjusts to the workload demands that we have. But if we really look at these different tools, infrastructure as code is the cornerstone of our strategy. Terraform lays out the architecture, and we use Atlantis, which automates the deployment, and this provides a framework where changes are traceable and reversible in line with what we need for PCI compliance. So with a smaller team and lots of infrastructure, automation is key, and that's why we invest a lot in how we structure and apply Terraform. Our guiding principle for our SREs: make the right thing easy and the wrong thing possible, but difficult. This mission statement empowers our engineers. We want to streamline their workflow, enabling them to deploy the infrastructure they need quickly, but it has to be already infused with the security and operational best practices from the get-go. And after the infrastructure is stood up, we want to be able to apply across that infrastructure when the best practices have evolved. There are specific PCI compliance controls around change management. So we bake our infrastructure change management workflows into pull requests. Using Atlantis, we can have full traceability of Terraform changes and enforce the associated separation of duties that we require. So I'd like to share a bit more about how we structure our Terraform. And I can't stress this enough, this strategy is the key for what comes next because we had to apply newly discovered PCI controls in our environment. We've used tailored modules to customize our application-specific infrastructure needs. But those modules are built on top of a layer of modules that manage the common infrastructure components. So imagine a scenario where you're managing resources like S3 buckets, databases, SNS topics. So each application is going to have its own unique Terraform module, but the actual baseline configurations that we need of these resources, let's say an S3 bucket, is handled by the common module, and that's shared across multiple applications. The advantage here is efficiency and consistency. When we need to make a change, maybe it's a security update or a new best practice, we update the common module. This change then cascades through all the application modules that reference it. This methodology not only streamlines the process of rolling out updates, but also ensures the uniformity across our infrastructure. When it comes to PCI compliance, this strategy is a game changer. It allows us to swiftly implement new controls or remediate any misconfigurations with minimal disruption. So let me tell you the story of Tally's PCI security journey from my point of view and how we gained PCI compliance. Before Tally, I worked for about 13 years at Equifax, and I had a bunch of different roles at Equifax. I was a developer on credit decisioning applications. I was in customer-facing professional services. I helped develop new products, and eventually I was an engineering manager. And I was an engineering manager in 2017 when Equifax suffered a data breach that exposed the personal records of over 140 million individuals. I had held previous roles where security wasn't the first priority, and many times an obstacle. Unfortunately, nothing is going to transform the security of a company or its employees like a data breach. For me, it transformed my career to reduce the risk of it ever happening again. Now, Equifax's response to this breach was monumental, a $1.5 billion investment in people, processes, and technology under intense regulatory scrutiny. To meet those compliance obligations, they created a now open source control framework. And I was actually part of a dedicated Scrum team, and we were tasked to automate the validation of that control framework. Now, transitioning to Tally was a shift in many ways. The entire security team here was smaller than the Scrum team I had just left at Equifax. Yet, the level of engineering and talent and commitment at Tally was immediately apparent. I could tell, though, my prior experience had given me a very different perspective when it came to audits and mapping to control frameworks. I remember in my first week, I learned Tally was well underway preparing for a PCI compliance audit. So I quickly jumped in to understand what they did. As I've gone over already, Tally's engineering is good. They invested in tooling for just-in-time access, they locked down the environment, and everything was infrastructure as code. They created an entirely separate environment just for the cardholder data, because they knew that the controls they wanted in place would not scale well for the rest of the production environment. Now, what didn't Tally do? We didn't use the PCI controls to inform what we built. So how do we know what the gaps are? Reading the controls should be straightforward, right? Let's try it together. So here's a PCI control, and let's try to map it to AWS. Now, PCI talks about a firewall like we're in 2002. It's some hardware device that performs a single function. AWS does have firewalls, but that same function can be applied at multiple levels like security groups. So a firewall function is actually a more abstract concept where those configurations could be applied at different resource types. For us, 8 different resource types. Network ACL, security groups, network firewalls, EKS clusters, VPCs, it just keeps on going. So instead of figuring out the crazy mapping ourselves, we used Datadog's cloud security management tool. It played a pivotal role in helping us bridge the gap in our PCI compliance journey. Now, what Datadog CSM did was effectively map the PCI controls directly to our AWS resource configurations. Now, it wasn't just about what needed to be fixed. It understood the intricacies of our AWS setup. We could see exactly where and how it aligned or didn't align with the PCI requirements. This tool was instrumental in transforming PCI requirements from those abstract concepts into concrete, applicable tests within our AWS environment. We went from that boring compliance jargon to a list of tests that had to pass. Now, it was probably hard to see that demo, so let's zoom in on some of the features. This first is a high-level overview of the posture score. This score represents the percentage of your environment that currently satisfies all of those out-of-the-box cloud infrastructure compliance rules. And as we click down, we can see here just a few of the configurations Datadog has translated from that same firewall PCI compliance control I just showed. And it's not just that the control translated into AWS resource configurations, but it also shows the surface area, like the percentage passing, and this helps us really prioritize the remediation. Now, configuration to control mapping, like we were talking about, is challenging, and one of the reasons is because it's not a one-to-one relationship. Datadog will map many cloud configurations to many controls in many control frameworks. Now, diving into the rules, we get away from the firewall terminology and into the resource type and why it's an issue. Here, a security group is not restricting outbound traffic. The compliance is there behind the scenes, but we're focusing on the why, which makes the decision to fix easier. Each finding also has details on how to remediate. Now, for us at Tally, we don't actually use these commands because it's going to be outside of our Terraform. However, the explanation is more interesting and engaging for engineers of what actually needs to be done. Now, our engineers were sometimes confused how a rule was being evaluated. For example, in this case, there's a rule for a firewall control saying outbound access on all ports must be restricted. For us, we actually had a network firewall that was blocking all outbound ports, so we thought this would be a false positive. But seeing the specific JSON representation of the resource, in this case, it was the AWS security group, showed exactly what were the offending fields, and these were most helpful for engineers to understand what was the expected change, and here you can see the egress is obviously unfettered for the security group. So, at least on the infrastructure side, we've got the tool that we need to close the gap between our implementation and the PCI requirements. Now, let me back away from the sponsored session a bit and talk to the whole audience here. There's probably a high likelihood that your business has some compliance gap that you need to close. So, here's some advice because during this process, we had a bunch of learnings. First advice I have is don't democratize control interpretation. Instead, pick an authority that will represent the decisions during the audit. As we've seen, the control interpretation could be subjective, and you want to be really solid and consistent with how you've implemented a specific control. Next, don't engage engineers with compliance language. Instead, show what needs to be fixed using the language that's going to be close to how they will fix it. For us, these were the AWS CLI commands or the JSON representations showing the offending fields flagged red. But these were also programmatic tests that when they pass, the engineers knows that they're done. Now, we made the initial mistake of creating a JIRA ticket per finding. And in our constantly scaling environment, we were creating thousands of JIRA tickets and then quickly resolving them. We're not inadvertently trying to load test JIRA here. So don't treat each finding for each resource individually. A JIRA ticket per finding is going to be overwhelming. Instead, look for trends and how we can make changes to configurations of common modules, and let's fix that. So CSM tools may offer auto remediation or directions of go into the UI or the AWS CLI to fix things manually. This type of activity would bypass our change management controls, they're going to piss off our SREs, and it's quickly going to get reverted. We're only infrastructure as code, so instead, you can use the CSM tool's direction as guidance in remediating per your own workflows. Andrew K., you want to talk a little bit about workflows?
Yeah, so of course Datadog has workflows now, and I think one of the things that's not always apparent is that that workflow can do anything that you want it to do. It's not just API-based remediation, it's not just opening a JIRA ticket, it can be doing things like making a pull request back to a CI/CD pipeline. So really the sky's the limit on the things that you can mash up to give your engineering teams one-button remediations for a lot of these in the way that you want to remediate that.
We're really excited to start looking into those types of workflows to see how we can integrate it into our Terraform. Now, another thing to do as you translate findings into remediation activities is to find the pattern. So ask yourself, everything for this rule is failing. Why? We found that grouping the remediation by resource type, then the rule, and then the finding worked best for us. I love the dopamine rush of a one-line, non-intrusive change in our common resource module that fixed hundreds of findings. Next, let your engineers know when they are compliant, and they're done. By giving engineers automated tests that are running near real time, they're able to push a change, swing over to the test, and see that the gap is closed. So, gliding back into the sponsored session, I'll quote our head of engineering operations. We love that Datadog is the least offensive compliance monitoring tool we have, but it won't get all the right nuance. But when this happens, we can actually customize the rules to more closely align to our implementation. Andrew K., can you talk a little bit more about how this works?
Sure thing. So of course, Datadog ships with a ton of out-of-the-box rules in the cloud security management platform. However, this is built on top of a Rego evaluator which is also part of a popular open source project called the Open Policy Agent. Not sure if anybody's heard of it. But Rego was actually created by Datadog. So of course we use that inside of the platform for you to write custom rules that can evaluate anything that we scan from your resources in your cloud environment. So that's a data lake that we build for you. It can match on anything in the resource structure, and conditions in the rule can dictate pass, fail, or skip for any configuration. And then rules, of course, it's up to you how you want to map those rules to criticality. The customization of criticality in your environment is, not to make a joke here, but it's critical. Because that's when you decide when to wake up somebody in the middle of the night versus send a Slack message versus open a Jira ticket, which are all things that we can do today. The Jira integration is generally available now inside of Datadog, so you can open Jira tickets or grouped sets of findings automatically.
And when we were creating the thousands of Jira tickets, we had actually used the Datadog event bus to get the findings in to then create the Jira tickets. But now we saw the new Jira feature, and everyone was like, wow, this is nice. Now, there's some controls not covered specifically in CSM. During our gap analysis, we found the need to deploy a file integrity monitoring tool, or a FIM. A FIM looks for the changes to critical files, then it alerts on them. Adding another tool this late in the game wasn't palatable, of course, so Datadog's versatility and number of features was key for us here. We already had the Datadog agent installed, and we were literally able to deploy, configure, and monitor our cardholder data environment for file changes in less than 2 days. The second part of the file integrity monitoring control is that when you get alert, you have to respond to them. And Datadog's workload security FIM filled this control, not just with alerts, but the ability to triage. These are classified not as misconfigurations, but as threats in CSM. Now, going through the detections, you're going to be able to create rules and also suppressions for common activities. For example, there's benign activity that happens as we use BottleRocket OS for managing pods and doing automatic updates. As we've used the tool and we've tuned those suppressions, our false positives have gone down dramatically. Then when it comes time for audit, we needed to generate a report that shows the audit trail of all the worked signals. Datadog, again, comes through with this feature. All right, let's zoom out. Compliance isn't exciting for the sake of being compliant. Instead, we would like the compliance activities to truly reduce the risk to our consumers and organization by increasing our security posture. And this happened a few ways for us at Tally. For one, making audits suck less really was motivating for our team. Kind of like the pain of a security breach, the pain of an audit causes the organization to reflect on where you can do what better. Although we separate environments into different compliance zones, the use of our common Terraform modules allowed for this cascading effect across all of our environments. In some places, we really thought it was going to be too difficult to apply a control, and it wasn't difficult at all. We also had critical conversations that drove us to look at what we have, what we need, and what we should remove. This helped us tackle technical debt, it helped us improve processes, and ensure we had adequate tooling. Now, I've run through some of the key views we've used at Tally, but there has been a lot of work by Datadog to tailor views to what different roles care about. How is Datadog thinking about this, Andrew K?
Yeah, so first of all, your cloud security platform should be breaking down silos between all of the parts of your business, ultimately leading to higher quality decision making. If you think about all the personas for stakeholders in your organizations, their needs are not dissimilar. They're just examining that data in a different way. If you think about it from a top-down perspective, a CEO, CTO, or CISO is going to wonder things like, what's our risk? And are we actively getting better over time? We definitely give that high-level view now inside of the cloud security inbox, inside of the cloud security management product. Auditors want to know how many controls have been implemented and measured appropriately. In this case, dashboarding lets us do that and close the gaps for engineers and security teams tracking their progress. And this is that posture score that Andrew was also talking about that Tally uses earlier in the presentation. Of course, security teams want a little bit more context to answer the question that we're all asking often, which is, are the attackers actively exploiting our security issues? And finally, all the way back to the security inbox, engineering teams need to know what's next in order of priority, because we're never going to close every single issue. So dashboarding is just one piece of the puzzle, though. Compliance monitoring and remediation is an ongoing process that happens as frequently as deploys inside of your environment. Each new set of infrastructure as code, patch, or feature introduces new attack surface. Believe it or not, once you check all the boxes, individual compliance violations follow the same traditional incident response process as we follow for anything inside of the cloud. So do you want to talk to us just a little bit about how you handle IR for high and maximum risk findings at Tally?
Yeah, absolutely. And CSM has triggered incident response at Tally, and we utilize Datadog to answer these questions during an incident. So let's talk about a scenario where a bucket's contents become publicly listable. The tagging helps us understand a resource's level of data classification, as well as the team responsible for the resource. We also use tags to locate the Terraform code that contains the misconfiguration. Next, we're going to ask, what other systems and resources does this connect to? Each finding gives you a resource view that shows the relationships between that misconfigured resource and other resources. Datadog doesn't always detect you have a mitigating control implemented at another layer, but by clicking on the upstream and downstream resources, we can jump to the posture of those resources to give it a more holistic assessment. Now, if we need to do a resource risk assessment, viewing the passing and failing misconfigurations helps here. You can chain multiple misconfigurations together, and that's going to change the probability and the impact of exploitation. And finally, when we've confirmed that there is a misconfiguration, we need to know the window of exposure. For example, with a listable S3 bucket, we need to understand the scope of access logs we're going to have to pull to analyze if and who listed the bucket contents. I mentioned previously that Datadog hasn't always gotten the right nuance or understood the holistic picture of a misconfiguration, but that's really starting to change with the security inbox. Can you tell us more about this, Andrew K?
Yeah, thanks. The security inbox, which we've shown several times in the presentation, provides all Datadog security users one place with an actionable list of their top security issues. This capability groups different signals coming from the different Datadog security products across vulnerabilities, threats, misconfigurations, and now also identity risk. And this is reInvent, after all, so I wanted to show you just one way that compliance can be an accelerator for your entire security program. So that brings us to PCI DSS requirement number 7, and that is to effectively implement strong access control measures. We're all responsible for it, and we all know that identity and access management has historically been one of the most challenging things in cloud. So earlier this year, Datadog rolled out a feature in cloud security management in the CIEM category, and somehow that is frustratingly pronounced KIM, by the way. Otherwise, it would be SIM, and that's a totally different thing, but this one is KIM, C-I-E-M. It evaluates your identity policies and specifically looks for 3 different types of dangerous conditions. And it's critical to keep an eye on the evolution of your policies in IAM over time, because most cloud breaches begin with credentials. And the impact of that breach is dictated by how permissive the roles and keys are, or the roles and specific grants are that are associated with those credentials. And as an industry, we've got a long ways to go with regard to how we manage our long-lived credentials. And this is just one fact, by the way, from our recently released Datadog State of Cloud Security report. It came out earlier this month. shows the average age of credentials across all major cloud providers. So we've got a little ways to go there. Additionally, in AWS environments not using single sign-on, static credentials are particularly long-lived in many cases and not deprovisioned when they're not in use. So you just kind of have these things sitting out there that are a potential risk to your business. On the permission side, the identity risk feature inside of Datadog CSM looks at these three major sets of cloud identity risks. Permissions gap. Do you have something that's overly permissive assigned to an entity that it's not using? Dangerous cross-account access conditions, either across an organization boundary or an account boundary. And finally, dangerous indirect access via things like inline policies or permissions that come via a group. Let's see it in action real quick. You can see that we detect dangerous conditions for all major types of entities: users, roles, and also instances. For findings related to machines, you can actually see how that's related to other resources in the environment, and more importantly, if that resource is actually accessible on the public internet. Of course, for each finding, you get a timeline for the life of that entity inside of your cloud environment, which is particularly useful for IR. And another new feature is the integration with Datadog workflows, where you can now automatically remediate some of these dangerous access conditions using workflows that are either triggered by a person or automatically based on criticality. Before we close out the session here today, I just want to share one additional resource if the compliance and compliance monitoring space is new to you, and that should be useful whether or not you are presently a Datadog customer. And that's Datadog Cloud Security Atlas. Cloud Security Atlas launched earlier this year and is a comprehensive, searchable index of cloud risk data on the threat and misconfiguration side. So we look at both potential attack paths through the environment and also the criticality of different misconfigurations. I think the thing that makes Cloud Security Atlas unique is that when we created this open source project, we persona-tailored the content for both business leaders and engineers. So it gives two explanations for every type of attack and every misconfiguration. So you have the right talking points to go to different parts of your organization and share why that thing is a risk to the business. So definitely check that out if you're new to the compliance and security space. There's 26 articles there today for the riskiest AWS misconfigurations and other types of security issues. So if you've been following along to the end of the session, don't forget, these are all the learnings. This is the one slide to take a picture of if you missed all the other slides, so that you want a single platform that lets you gain and share insights. You want to keep your compliance-controlled architectures simple. I think Andrew talked a lot about that and how Tally's been successful architecting PCI around account boundaries. When remediating findings, group remediations, and have a single plan to reduce toil and engineer workload. Leverage a common set of gold standards and modules whenever possible. And finally, go beyond compliance and actively try to exceed those standards, because compliance is, in fact, often the minimum burden that we're all expected in our cloud environments. It's not the end of the security journey. And lastly, I don't know if you've heard, but we're also proud to be AWS's Design Partner of the Year, which was announced in the keynote this morning. So again, thank you for coming to our session today. We actually don't have mics in the room to take questions. We'll be right outside the theater afterwards, though, if you want to snag us and ask us about anything in Datadog. And thanks so much for being here today. Please give Andrew a big round of applause.
Thank you.
First-time reInvent speaker. You did a great job. So we'll see you at the next Datadog session, or we'll see you at the booth in the expo hall.
Thanks, everyone.